Welcome back to the channel. If you are ready for a story about the absolute most satisfying, calculating, and flawless revenge you will ever hear, you are in the exact right place. Before we begin this explosive journey, please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button on this video, and leave your comments below. Let's dive into the price of truth. The price of truth. The wife's ultimate masterpiece. Some women tragically discover infidelity through carelessly forgotten text messages on a glowing smartphone screen. Others discover it through the faint, highly toxic scent of an unfamiliar, cheap perfume clinging to a dress shirt. Eliza discovered it entirely through a crumpled luxury restaurant receipt buried deep inside the pocket of her wealthy husband's tailored suit. A highly expensive receipt for exactly 2 people, perfectly date-stamped on the exact day he aggressively claimed to have been working brutally late at the corporate office. But what completely, utterly destroyed her wasn't simply discovering that Adrian had a mistress. It was the horrifying realization that this mistress was exactly the same age her own daughter was when her marriage began, 27 years old. Furthermore, she discovered that in exactly 3 short days, her arrogant husband was secretly planning to proudly parade this mistress at the absolute most exclusive, high society gala of the entire year, actively presenting her as his brand new official partner. While Eliza was strictly expected to stay pathetically hidden at home, blindly playing the role of the ignorant, obedient wife, he had absolutely no idea what was coming. Because Eliza had fiercely decided that she too would absolutely be making an appearance at that massive event. And the absolute microsecond she stepped foot inside that grand ballroom, absolutely nothing in their elite world would ever be the same again. The crisp morning sun of Manhattan aggressively filtered through the imported silk curtains of the sprawling sterling luxury townhouse on the Upper East Side, beautifully creating a golden dance of light across the pristine Italian marble of the grand foyer. At exactly 32 years old, Eliza possessed a breathtaking, classic beauty that effortlessly turned heads on the busy city streets. She had cascading chestnut hair that fell in soft, elegant waves over her shoulders, incredibly piercing green eyes that gleamed with an almost hypnotic intensity, and a radiant smile that, even when heavily forced, possessed the sheer power to illuminate absolutely any room she walked into. She was delicately, meticulously arranging fresh-cut orchids in a massive crystal vase, a quiet, daily ritual that had tragically become her absolute only way of finding a tiny sliver of peace amidst the silent, suffocating chaos of her life. "Mommy, can I help?" The incredibly sweet, angelic voice of Sophia echoed softly down the long hallway, and Eliza physically felt her shattered heart instantly warm. Her beautiful 5-year-old daughter was her absolute greatest, purest joy. A tiny, flawless miniature version of herself, possessing the exact same expressive green eyes and an incredibly natural, radiating sweetness. The loud, heavy sound of hurried footsteps aggressively descending the grand marble staircase violently announced Adrian's arrival. At 38 years old, Adrian Sterling was an undeniably, intimidatingly striking man. He was incredibly tall, possessing incredibly broad shoulders that flawlessly filled out his $5,000 bespoke Italian suits. He had thick, perfectly styled dark hair, and that highly arrogant, wildly confident smile that had not only completely conquered Eliza's naive heart years ago, but had aggressively commanded the absolute respect and deep admiration of the entire Wall Street financial district. Adrian Sterling was the ruthless global CEO of Sterling and Partners Consulting, one of the absolute largest, most terrifyingly powerful corporate advisory firms on the entire East Coast. His meteoric, massive rise in the cutthroat corporate world was an absolute legend, transforming from a highly ambitious, middle-class young man into one of the absolute wealthiest, most powerful titans in New York in less than a single decade. But with that massive, explosive success came a highly toxic, terrifying transformation that Eliza had painfully observed with a deeply growing, agonizing sadness. The incredibly kind, highly attentive man she had fiercely fallen in love with had violently given way to a cold, highly calculating, and infinitely worse, incredibly disrespectful monster. "Good morning," Adrian muttered highly distractedly, barely even bothering to cast a single glance at his beautiful wife and daughter as he aggressively scrolled through his expensive smartphone. His highly confidential corporate messages apparently seemed infinitely more fascinating to him than the family he had formally, legally, sworn to fiercely love and violently protect. "Daddy!" Sophia happily sprinted directly toward him, her tiny arms thrown wide open for a massive hug, which Adrian returned completely, utterly mechanically. His cold eyes absolutely never left the glowing screen of his device. "Hey, sweetie, Daddy is incredibly busy right now," he stated, his deep voice heavily laced with that highly specific, thinly veiled impatience that had tragically become his absolute trademark inside their home. Eliza quietly observed the pathetic scene with a massively heavy, agonizing heart, physically watching the bright, beautiful light in Sophia's eyes slightly dim, violently losing a tiny fraction of its pure enthusiasm. It was absolutely always exactly like this. Adrian aggressively treated his own flesh and blood exactly like a tedious, boring social obligation, a pathetic chore to be briefly tolerated between highly massive corporate meetings and elite business engagements. "Adrian," Eliza calmly attempted to gently capture his attention, her voice incredibly soft, but forged with pure, undeniable determination. "Today is Saturday. I genuinely thought we could spend the entire day together as a family. Maybe cheerfully take Sophia to Central Park, or—" "Absolutely impossible," he aggressively interrupted her, entirely refusing to lift his arrogant gaze from his phone. "I urgently need to meticulously review the massive presentation for the aggressive corporate merger with the European hotel conglomerate in London. If we successfully secure this multi-million-dollar contract, we are going to violently expand across the entire European continent." He finally, slowly looked up at her, but his piercing gaze was completely freezing, almost disgustingly condescending. "Certain massive things are infinitely more important than pathetic little strolls through the park, Eliza. I highly expect you to completely understand that." The heavy, toxic words violently sliced into her soul, but Eliza had flawlessly learned exactly how to maintain her absolute composure. Agonizing years of marriage to a narcissist like Adrian had brutally taught her that physically showing deep pain or massive frustration absolutely only resulted in significantly more freezing coldness and aggressive, toxic distance. "Of course," she responded, offering a highly polished, fake smile that absolutely did not reach her dead eyes. "Sophia and I will easily find something wonderful to do." Adrian gave a highly distracted nod, his fingers already aggressively flying across his keyboard, frantically typing a brand new message. Eliza literally could not help but deeply notice the exact, highly specific way his fingers moved, and the highly subtle, secretive smirk that played on his lips as he typed. It physically made her stomach violently drop, aggressively triggering a dark, terrifying suspicion that she had been desperately, cowardly trying to completely ignore for agonizing months. Adrian's expensive phone suddenly, loudly rang, and he answered it immediately. His arrogant tone instantly, magically shifted into that incredibly charming, highly enveloping, seductive voice that he exclusively reserved for people he deemed massively important. "Michaela, my dear," he purred smoothly, aggressively turning his back and walking directly toward his private home office. "Of course we can completely move our private meeting up." Eliza physically felt the blood violently freeze inside her veins. Michaela. That highly specific, toxic name had been aggressively, constantly popping up in Adrian's casual conversations over the last few agonizing months. She was always highly professionally described as an incredibly promising executive or a brilliant, rising marketing consultant. But there was something deeply, undeniably sinister in the exact, intimate way Adrian softly pronounced her name. A highly subtle, toxic intimacy that violently set off absolutely every single, terrifying alarm bell deep inside Eliza's brilliant mind. "Mommy, is Daddy going to play with us today?" Sophia's tiny, incredibly innocent voice was completely filled with desperate, pure hope. Eliza gracefully crouched down again, gently, fiercely taking her daughter's tiny hands into her own. "Not today, my beautiful love. But do you know exactly what we are going to do? We are going to have an incredibly special, massive girls' day, just the two of us. How about we go directly to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and then we aggressively eat a massive mountain of ice cream at that incredible parlor you absolutely love." Sophia's beautiful eyes instantly, miraculously lit up again. Eliza was so incredibly, profoundly grateful to possess a daughter so fiercely resilient, so beautifully capable of finding pure joy even when she was deeply, toxically disappointed by her own father. While they were actively preparing to leave the massive townhouse, Eliza literally could not prevent herself from clearly hearing highly toxic fragments of Adrian's muffled phone conversation aggressively echoing from his locked office. Lethal words like "getting together," "highly exclusive reservation for two," and "I absolutely cannot wait," violently reached her ears. Every single, specific word was exactly like a tiny, violently sharp dagger plunged directly into her shattered heart. Interactive question. Have you ever been gaslighted or ignored by a partner whose priorities were completely mixed up? How did you handle it? Tell us your story in the comments. The crumbling facade. Later that beautiful afternoon, as they happily walked hand in hand through the bright, sunlit paths of Central Park, Sophia enthusiastically chattering about the massive, beautiful paintings she desperately wanted to see at the museum, Eliza violently permitted her mind to deeply analyze exactly what her life had tragically become. There was a beautiful, distant time when she and Adrian were absolutely, totally inseparable. A time when he would make her laugh so incredibly hard, her stomach would physically ache. When his dark eyes would brilliantly shine with pure, unadulterated admiration every single time he looked at her. She vividly, painfully remembered exactly how he used to aggressively surprise her with highly romantic, sweeping gestures. How he would secretly leave beautiful love notes hidden deep inside her designer purse. How he would fiercely, tightly hold her hand in the dark during movie dates. Exactly when did the massive, horrifying shift occur? When exactly did the man who once loudly, publicly declared that she was the absolute most important woman in his entire existence begin aggressively treating her exactly like an expensive piece of antique furniture? Something incredibly beautiful and highly polished to proudly display at elite, high society events, but ultimately, utterly ignored and completely discarded in their daily, private life? "Mommy, are you feeling sad?" Sophia's incredibly pure, innocent question violently snapped her directly back into the harsh present. "No, darling," Eliza smiled warmly, pressing a fierce, loving kiss to the top of her daughter's head. "Mommy is just deeply thinking about exactly how incredibly lucky she is to have a daughter as absolutely perfect and special as you." It was the absolute truth, at least partially. Sophia was her bright, guiding light, her absolute, unbreakable reason to fiercely keep fighting, to flawlessly maintain her absolute dignity, even when she felt completely, utterly invisible inside her own massive home. But boiling dangerously just beneath the flawless, highly polished surface, a massive, terrifying storm of violent emotions was aggressively churning. Blinding pain, white-hot anger, deep confusion, and something massive she absolutely wasn't completely ready to formally admit to herself yet. The rapidly growing, terrifying certainty that her entire perfect marriage had violently mutated into an absolute, pathetic farce. That exact night, long after safely tucking Sophia into bed, Eliza found herself completely alone in the massive, silent living room, highly distractedly flipping through a luxury fashion magazine. Adrian still absolutely had not returned from his critical weekend corporate meeting, and she literally could not stop aggressively obsessing over the toxic name, Michaela, and the exact intimate way he had whispered it. The loud, heavy sound of the front deadbolt violently unlocking made her heart aggressively accelerate. Adrian confidently strutted in, looking incredibly, highly pleased with himself. But his arrogant smirk instantly, violently, vanished the absolute microsecond he saw Eliza sitting quietly, waiting for him. "You're still awake?" he asked casually, aggressively loosening his expensive silk tie. "How exactly was your massive meeting?" Eliza asked, meticulously keeping her voice completely, perfectly neutral. "Highly productive," he answered, incredibly vaguely, confidently walking over to the crystal wet bar to aggressively pour himself a massive glass of neat whiskey. "The European conglomerate is incredibly interested. This could be our absolute definitive entry directly into the London markets." Eliza nodded slowly, but her brilliant mind literally could not stop itself from asking the dangerous question. "And did Michaela also heavily participate in this massive meeting?" Something massive and terrifying violently shifted in Adrian's arrogant expression. A highly brief, microscopic flash of something that could have easily been deep guilt or violent irritation, aggressively disappearing so incredibly fast that she almost thought she had completely imagined it. "She meticulously coordinated the massive market analysis for the entire project," he stated, his deep voice now slightly, noticeably tense. "Exactly why are you aggressively asking?" "Pure, innocent curiosity," Eliza smoothly lied. "You just highly frequently talk about her an awful lot lately." Adrian glared at her with that exact, highly condescending expression she knew way too incredibly well. Exactly as if she were a pathetic, ignorant child, aggressively asking highly impertinent, stupid questions. "Eliza, you absolutely do not understand the massive, highly complex intricacies of the global corporate business world. Michaela is an incredibly competent, highly elite professional. Absolutely nothing more." He violently downed the remainder of his expensive whiskey in one single, aggressive gulp. "I am deeply exhausted. Good night." And with that final, cold dismissal, he aggressively marched up the grand staircase, leaving Eliza completely, utterly alone with her massive, terrifying suspicions and her violently shattered heart. That exact night, lying frozen in the massive king bed right next to an arrogant husband who was currently sleeping incredibly soundly, Eliza stared blankly up at the dark ceiling. She agonizingly asked herself exactly when she had completely mutated into an absolute stranger inside her own damn life. Exactly when had she completely stopped fiercely fighting for her toxic marriage and simply, pathetically, begun to just silently survive? On the complete other side of the massive windows, Manhattan continued to be incredibly alive and aggressively pulsing. A massive city completely filled with infinite possibilities and wild dreams. But safely trapped inside those highly luxurious, expensive walls, Eliza felt more incredibly, suffocatingly alone than ever before. She possessed absolutely no idea that incredibly soon, her entire universe was going to violently, aggressively take a completely unexpected turn, and that the fierce, untouchable, powerful woman she had once proudly been was about to violently resurrect from the dead ashes of her catastrophic, failed marriage. The receipt and the confession. The agonizing week continued its highly toxic, usual course inside the Sterling townhouse. Adrian aggressively left the house earlier and earlier every single morning and returned significantly later every single night, absolutely always armed with highly elaborate, complex excuses about emerging market analysis and aggressive international expansion strategies that supposedly demanded his absolute, constant attention. Eliza had tragically become an absolute, elite specialist at perfectly reading the highly toxic signs. The expensive smartphone that he now aggressively carried absolutely everywhere with him, exactly as if it were a physical extension of his own body. The highly secretive, toxic smiles while he furiously typed text messages. The distinct, unfamiliar, highly expensive designer perfume that occasionally aggressively clung to his bespoke suits. It was a highly rainy, gloomy Thursday afternoon when absolutely everything finally, violently shattered. Sophia had happily stayed after school for an elite extracurricular activity, and Eliza had aggressively decided to utilize the quiet afternoon to catch up on organizing the massive walk-in closets. She was meticulously organizing the designer suits when she aggressively grabbed one of Adrian's jackets that desperately needed to be sent to the luxury dry cleaners, while automatically, methodically, checking the deep pockets, a highly routine habit heavily developed after years of marriage. Her slender fingers aggressively brushed against something that made her heart completely, violently, stop. A tiny, heavily crumpled, folded piece of paper. With incredibly, slightly trembling hands, she slowly, meticulously unfolded it. It was completely, undeniably, a luxury restaurant receipt. But it absolutely wasn't just any generic, random restaurant. It was explicitly from Le Bernardin in Midtown Manhattan, one of the absolute most incredibly exclusive, highly romantic, elite dining establishments in the entire city. The highly detailed receipt clearly showed it was explicitly for exactly 2 people. It included a highly expensive, $800 bottle of vintage French champagne and massive, exotic seafood dishes that Adrian would absolutely never ever order for a stuffy corporate business meeting. But what made her completely, violently collapse to the floor was the exact date heavily stamped at the top, exactly 2 days ago. The absolute, exact same day he had aggressively, loudly claimed he had been physically trapped at the corporate office until midnight, furiously preparing massive financial reports for the European investors, and had stumbled home highly exhausted, explicitly claiming he was way too tired to even eat dinner. Eliza collapsed heavily into the plush armchair inside the massive closet, the highly damning receipt still violently clutched in her shaking hands. She felt exactly as if the entire planet had just violently tilted off its axis. Absolutely all the terrifying suspicions, all the massive, blazing red flags she had desperately, pathetically tried to rationalize or blindly ignore, suddenly, violently crystallized into one absolutely undeniable, agonizingly painful truth. The loud, aggressive ringing of her phone violently snapped her back to brutal reality. It was Julian Hayes, Adrian's senior corporate partner. Ironically, Julian was one of the absolute only true, genuine friends she still currently possessed. "Eliza, my dear," his incredibly warm, highly concerned voice echoed through the speaker. "Exactly how are you holding up?" Julian was absolutely everything Adrian had catastrophically failed to be. He was incredibly kind, deeply attentive, and an incredibly powerful man of absolute, unbreakable moral principles, who treated human beings with pure, genuine respect. At 50 years old, he possessed a highly natural, classic elegance that absolutely did not desperately rely on flashy clothes or arrogant designer accessories. His distinguished silver hair at the temples and the deep laugh lines around his eyes perfectly spoke of a man who had lived an incredibly profound life of purpose and absolute integrity. "Julian, Eliza violently hesitated, desperately fighting back the hot, agonizing tears that aggressively threatened to overflow. "Do you happen to have a few spare minutes? I desperately, urgently need to speak with someone." "Absolutely always," he responded, without a single microsecond of hesitation. "I am aggressively on my way right now." Exactly 40 minutes later, Eliza was sitting quietly in the massive living room, gracefully serving Julian a cup of expensive coffee, while desperately attempting to find the exact words to articulate the massive, violent hurricane of emotions currently destroying her heart. He observed her closely with his highly compassionate brown eyes, waiting incredibly patiently for her to finally gather the fierce courage to speak. "Julian," she began, her voice barely a fragile whisper. Do you know something massive about Adrian? Something highly critical that I absolutely need to know?" The heavy, suffocating silence that immediately followed was an absolutely sufficient answer. She clearly saw the deep, agonizing pain perfectly reflected in Julian's handsome face. The brutal, internal war between his strict corporate loyalty to his business partner and his pure, genuine concern for her. He finally spoke, his voice incredibly heavy, with profound sadness. "Exactly how long have we been incredible friends, Eliza?" "Over a decade," she replied softly. "Since long before my toxic marriage." "Then you profoundly know that I would absolutely never, ever lie to you." Julian leaned heavily forward, aggressively clasping his hands together. "But you also must realize that this puts me in a completely, highly impossible position." Eliza slowly, deliberately slid the crumpled restaurant receipt directly across the coffee table. "I violently found this today." Julian stared deeply at the paper and tightly closed his eyes exactly as if he were physically experiencing a sharp, agonizing stab of pain. When he finally opened them again, they were completely filled with deep sadness and absolute, unbreakable determination. "Her exact name is Michaela Vance," he stated, every single word painfully forced out of his mouth. "She is exactly 27 years old. She is a highly ambitious marketing consultant. She has been actively working directly with our firm for roughly 6 months. Eliza felt exactly as if she had just been violently punched in the stomach by a heavyweight boxer. Hearing the absolute, vocal confirmation of her absolute worst, most terrifying nightmares was infinitely more agonizing than she could have ever possibly imagined. "Exactly how long has this massive affair been going on?" she asked, her voice almost entirely inaudible. "I would aggressively estimate it began roughly 5 months ago, perhaps slightly longer." Julian let out a massive, highly exhausted sigh. "Eliza, I aggressively tried to forcefully talk to Adrian on multiple occasions. I desperately tried to make him clearly see the absolute toxic insanity of exactly what he was doing, exactly what he was aggressively risking. His beautiful family, his pristine corporate reputation, absolutely everything. And what exactly did he say? He arrogantly claimed that I was completely old-fashioned, that I absolutely didn't understand the highly complex nature of modern, elite life. The massive, toxic bitterness in Julian's voice was completely palpable. He arrogantly stated that you were completely content simply being a pathetic trophy wife, and that Michaela aggressively challenged him intellectually. The toxic words violently slashed her to the bone. They were infinitely more painful coming through Julian, who she knew was desperately trying to soften the brutal blow. "Trophy wife," she repeated blankly, tasting the highly toxic words on her tongue, exactly as if they were pure, unadulterated venom. "He is completely, utterly wrong, Eliza," Julian stated with pure, fierce vehemence. "Absolutely, 100% wrong. You are undeniably one of the absolute smartest, most incredibly talented, fierce women I have ever met in my entire life. The fact that you graciously, willingly chose to fully dedicate yourself to raising a beautiful family absolutely does not diminish your massive, incredible value." Eliza slowly stood up and walked directly to the massive window, staring blankly out at the perfectly manicured, expensive garden she herself had meticulously planned and heavily supervised. Absolutely everything in her entire life looked perfectly, flawlessly arranged on the outside. But on the inside, it was completely, violently rotting away. 5 agonizing months, she murmured softly. 27 years old is exactly the specific age I was when Adrian and I got married. The highly cruel, disgusting irony of the massive situation absolutely did not escape her. While she was desperately building a life, carefully creating a beautiful home, fiercely trying to be the absolute perfect wife he arrogantly demanded, Adrian was actively, aggressively building a massive, toxic parallel lie. A highly secret, double life that completely, maliciously excluded absolutely every single vow they had ever sworn to each other. "Eliza." Julian slowly approached her, his voice incredibly soft, but forged of pure steel. "You desperately need to know exactly one more massive thing." She violently spun around, clearly seeing something highly terrifying in his eyes that made her absolutely dread exactly what was coming next. "There is a massive, highly exclusive corporate gala next week. The annual executive banquet of the Manhattan Business Association, held at the Plaza Hotel. Adrian is absolutely going to be there, and—" he violently hesitated, clearly struggling to force the horrific words out. "Michaela will also be proudly attending as his official corporate +1. Eliza's entire universe completely, violently, stopped spinning. She leaned heavily against the cold windowsill, physically feeling her legs violently give way. "Official +1? She repeated, her voice coming out as a highly suffocated, choking whisper. Hifondidi aggressively told the elite financial press that she is his brand new, highly strategic corporate partner, that she will be officially, publicly introduced to the entire Manhattan Business Society at this massive event. Julian violently clenched his fists, his own massive anger physically manifesting. "Eliza, please deeply forgive me for having to be the one to brutally tell you this, but you absolutely deserve to know the truth." "And me?" she asked, her brain desperately trying to process the sheer, massive magnitude of the public betrayal. What exact, pathetic excuse did he invent for my massive absence? He arrogantly stated that you were currently tending to highly private, personal family matters. Julian's heavy words sliced exactly like razors. He claimed that you actively preferred to keep your pathetic private life completely away from the massive corporate spotlight. Eliza tightly closed her eyes, violently feeling a highly toxic, lethal cocktail of pure humiliation, white-hot anger, and a pain so incredibly deep it felt physically agonizing. Adrian wasn't just having a pathetic, dirty affair. He was actively, aggressively replacing her. He was maliciously erasing her entire existence from his public, elite life. "Exactly how much longer, Julian?" she asked, violently snapping her eyes open and glaring directly at him. "Exactly how much longer do you honestly believe he fully intends to aggressively maintain this toxic farce?" "Honestly? I highly suspect he aggressively plans to formally demand a divorce the absolute second the massive corporate deal with the London investors is completely finalized." Julian let out a heavy sigh. "Michaela, she isn't just a simple, stupid mistress, Eliza. She is incredibly ambitious, highly calculating. I genuinely believe she views you as a pathetic stepping stone to aggressively build her own massive corporate empire." The brutal revelation acted exactly like the absolute final, lethal blow. Eliza collapsed heavily back into the armchair, fiercely processing not only the catastrophic end of her marriage, but the highly cruel, completely public manner in which her execution was being ruthlessly planned. "He is going to violently leave me with absolutely nothing," she muttered, speaking more to herself than to Julian. "He is going to aggressively paint me as the pathetic, inadequate, lazy wife, the weak woman who literally couldn't keep up with his massive, elite professional growth. Not if he absolutely has no other choice," Julian stated, a massive, terrifying, brand-new determination violently emerging in his deep voice. "Eliza, you are absolutely not the same incredibly vulnerable, naive woman who blindly married Adrian 7 years ago. You have massively grown. You have fiercely evolved. You have completely transformed into a silent but incredibly terrifying, powerful force. It is officially time to aggressively prove it." She looked at him in pure, unadulterated confusion. "What exactly do you mean?" "You are aggressively going to that massive gala." "Julian, I absolutely cannot." "You absolutely can, and you absolutely will." He interrupted her smoothly, but with absolute, unbreakable firmness. "Absolutely not as the pathetic, humiliated, weeping wife who cowardly hides at home, but as the fiercely powerful, untouchable, elegant goddess that you truly are. Let Adrian and his pathetic little mistress vividly know that you are absolutely not going to silently disappear into the night." "And exactly how do you propose I do that?" Eliza's voice carried a heavy tone of pure desperation. "I literally do not even possess a damn invitation." Julian smiled fiercely, for the absolute first time since he arrived. "You are going as my official +1. I am a massive senior partner at the firm. I possess the absolute, undeniable right to bring whoever the hell I want." He paused highly significantly. "And I currently possess some incredibly interesting, highly explosive information regarding Adrian's highly questionable corporate business practices that the board might find enlightening." "Julian, I absolutely cannot ask you to." "You absolutely aren't asking. I am fiercely offering." He stood up and confidently walked directly toward her. "Eliza, Adrian absolutely isn't just maliciously betraying you. He is aggressively, illegally betraying the strict ethical principles of our massive firm. There are highly irregular, fraudulent contracts, massive, undeclared, illegal commissions, an entire series of highly toxic activities that could completely, violently destroy our entire corporate reputation if they were ever brought to light." "Are you legally talking about aggressive blackmail?" I am legally talking about absolute, pure justice, Julian corrected her coldly, and fiercely protecting you and Sophia from the massive, violent storm that is about to hit. That exact night, long after Julian had quietly left, Eliza found herself silently standing in Sophia's dark room, watching her beautiful daughter sleep incredibly peacefully. The pure, unadulterated innocence resting on the little girl's face brutally contrasted with the massive, violent hurricane of toxic emotions aggressively destroying her mother's heart. Mommy is going to aggressively fight for us, my beautiful princess, she fiercely whispered, gently, lovingly kissing her daughter's warm forehead. I am absolutely not going to let that monster aggressively treat us exactly like pathetic, disposable garbage. When Adrian finally strutted home that night, significantly later than ever before, with the highly toxic stench of Michaela's cheap perfume still aggressively clinging to his skin, he was shocked to find Eliza patiently waiting for him in the dark living room. But there was something incredibly, terrifyingly different about her. Something massive that his arrogant brain literally could not immediately identify. Still awake? He asked casually, exactly as he always did. Adrian, she stated, her voice shockingly, terrifyingly, calm and highly controlled. We urgently need to talk. He glared at her with deep, toxic suspicion, aggressively noticing the massive, terrifying shift in her posture. The exact way she held her shoulders perfectly straight, her chin tilted incredibly high. About exactly what? About the massive, highly exclusive gala next week. Eliza gracefully, confidently stood up, walking slowly, powerfully toward him. I clearly heard you will be bringing a highly special +1. Adrian's handsome face violently paled for a microsecond, but he rapidly, arrogantly reconstructed his fake composure. Eliza, I can completely explain. You absolutely do not need to. She violently cut him off, her voice flawlessly maintaining that terrifying, disconcerting, absolute calm. In fact, I highly suspect it will be an incredibly, massively revealing night for absolutely everyone involved. What the hell exactly do you mean by that? Eliza smiled. Absolutely not the highly forced, pathetic, submissive smile he arrogantly knew, but something entirely brand new, something that aggressively carried a massive, highly dangerous, lethal promise. You will completely find out at the absolute perfect moment, Adrian. Good night. And with that, she confidently, powerfully, glided up the grand staircase, leaving him completely, utterly alone, in the dark with his toxic lies, and a rapidly growing, terrifying sensation that he had massively, catastrophically underestimated the fierce woman he had blindly married. Interactive question. Eliza is planning her revenge. What is your absolute favorite revenge movie or story? Share it in the comments. The transformation and the emerald gown. The chaotic, fast-paced days leading directly up to the massive gala were an absolute whirlwind hurricane of fierce preparation and total physical transformation for Eliza. For the absolute first time in agonizing years, she fiercely permitted herself to aggressively spend massive amounts of money entirely on herself. Not just the highly quick, practical shopping trips she had pathetically grown accustomed to, but a massive, aggressive investment in her own absolute image, power, and pure confidence. Early Monday morning, while Adrian was frantically rushing out the door for yet another of his highly critical corporate meetings, Eliza confidently dialed Isabella Vaughn, an old, fierce college friend who had miraculously become one of the absolute most highly sought-after, elite fashion stylists in all of Manhattan. Eliza Sterling! Isabella's booming voice loudly echoed through the speaker, completely filled with genuine, massive surprise and pure joy. It has been so incredibly long. I heard you married that famous, arrogant CEO. How exactly is elite, high society life treating you?" "Incredibly complicated," Eliza replied with brutal honesty. "Isabella, I urgently need your massive help. I desperately need a bespoke gown for the elite Manhattan Business Association Gala, and I need to look absolutely, terrifyingly unforgettable." There was a heavy, highly pregnant pause on the other end of the line, and Eliza could almost physically hear the brilliant gears of Isabella's highly creative, elite mind rapidly spinning. "Exactly what type of unforgettable are we fiercely talking about here, darling? The type that aggressively stops traffic, or the exact type that violently destroys relationships?" "Absolutely the second one," Eliza stated, without a single microsecond of hesitation. "Perfect," Isabella smirked with pure, unadulterated satisfaction. "I will be at your townhouse in exactly 1 hour with several explosive options that will make you feel exactly like the untouchable goddess you have absolutely always been." When Isabella aggressively arrived, heavily accompanied by 3 frantic assistants carrying massive, heavy garment bags and huge cases of designer accessories, Eliza felt exactly as if she were about to violently undergo a complete, total metamorphosis. "My beautiful dear," Isabella said, intensely studying Eliza with highly critical, professional eyes. "You are significantly thinner, and there is a massive, heavy tension in your shoulders that absolutely wasn't there in college. But your beautiful eyes, your eyes possess a violent, white-hot fire that I have absolutely never, ever seen before. That is incredibly good. Highly, terrifyingly good." The next 3 agonizing hours were an absolute, highly transformative experience. Isabella had aggressively brought exactly 5 elite, bespoke gowns, each one infinitely more blindingly dazzling than the last. There was a blood-red one that aggressively hugged every single curve in a highly provocative manner, a deep navy blue one with massive crystal detailing that screamed pure royal elegance, and a pitch-black one with a highly structured, aggressive neckline that was simultaneously incredibly sophisticated and utterly devastating. But it was the absolute 5th gown that made Eliza completely, utterly stop breathing. It was a breathtaking, incredibly deep emerald green, the exact, flawless match to her piercing green eyes. The elite cut flawlessly, brilliantly combined highly aggressive modernity with absolute, timeless classicism. The incredibly expensive silk fabric violently flowed exactly like liquid water completely over her body, flawlessly accentuating her incredible silhouette completely without being remotely vulgar. The plunging, completely open back was an absolute masterpiece of highly subtle, lethal seduction. "This one," she stated simply, staring fiercely into the full-length mirror. She absolutely no longer saw the pathetic, neglected, invisible wife she had tragically mutated into. She clearly, vividly saw the fierce, untouchable, terrifyingly powerful woman who had always been aggressively sleeping beneath the heavy, toxic layers of pathetic submission and self-denial. "I absolutely knew you would fiercely choose that one." Isabella smiled with massive satisfaction. "It is the absolute hardest one to successfully pull off. It strictly requires absolute, unshakable, terrifying confidence. But on you, it is going to be completely, utterly devastating." They aggressively spent the entire rest of the afternoon meticulously selecting towering designer heels, massive diamond jewelry, and fiercely debating highly complex hairstyle options. Isabella aggressively insisted on booking Eliza with her own elite, private glam squad. Highly exclusive professionals, who exclusively worked with massive A-list celebrities and elite international supermodels. Eliza, Isabella stated quietly, while they were aggressively organizing the final details. Can I politely ask exactly what is actually going on? You look exactly like a highly dangerous woman on a massive, lethal mission. Eliza deeply considered for a microsecond whether she should reveal the highly sordid, toxic details of her horrific situation. But something incredibly genuine and compassionate in Isabella's expression made her fiercely decide on absolute honesty. My toxic husband has been aggressively carrying on a massive affair for exactly 5 months. He is actively planning to proudly parade his young mistress at the massive gala as his official corporate partner, while I am strictly pathetically supposed to stay locked at home, exactly like an obedient, invisible wife, blindly pretending I know absolutely nothing. Isabella's eyes violently narrowed, incredibly dangerously. What exact kind of disgusting monster does that to a beautiful woman like you? The exact kind of arrogant monster who completely forgot that he legally married a powerful woman, absolutely not a pathetic, decorative accessory. Eliza's voice carried a highly freezing, terrifying determination. But he is going to violently remember it in a highly public, incredibly memorable way. Excellent! Isabella smiled with a highly toxic malice that rapidly reminded Eliza exactly why they had been incredibly close friends in college. In that case, we will aggressively ensure that you are absolutely, undeniably unforgettable. Meanwhile, safely locked inside the massive corporate offices of Sterling and Partners, Adrian was currently having his own incredibly tense, highly aggressive series of conversations. Julian had formally requested a highly private, closed-door meeting, and Adrian could physically, violently, feel his senior partner's massive disapproval radiating off him exactly like suffocating heat waves. Adrian, we urgently need to discuss Michaela, Julian stated incredibly bluntly, aggressively slamming the heavy office door completely shut. Julian, we have already aggressively discussed this. She is a highly competent professional, and she is actively, illegally, pocketing massive, unauthorized corporate commissions directly from the massive London clients. Julian violently interrupted him. I successfully found massive, glaring discrepancies in the complex contracts she personally drafted. Massive, hidden commissions that are being illegally wired directly into a highly secure, private offshore account entirely under her name. Adrian physically felt all the blood violently freeze in his veins. What the hell are you talking about? Julian aggressively hurled a massive, thick legal folder directly onto the mahogany table. 3 completely separate, massive contracts, absolutely all of them containing highly illegal, hidden clauses that she maliciously inserted completely without corporate authorization. We are legally talking about over $200,000 in massive, irregular financial kickbacks. This has to be a massive misunderstanding. You are being aggressively, maliciously used, Adrian, Julian stated, his voice completely filled with heavy pity and absolute frustration. Michaela absolutely does not care about you. She only fiercely cares about your massive position, your elite access to wealthy clients, and your powerful signature on the bottom line of contracts. You are aggressively overreacting simply because you absolutely never liked her. I am desperately trying to legally save our massive company and your entire pristine reputation, Julian fired back. And by the way, perhaps miraculously save your failing marriage too. Adrian violently stood up, aggressively marching to the massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the bustling financial center of Manhattan. The massive city stretched out before him, an absolute symbol of absolutely everything he had ruthlessly conquered, absolutely everything he had meticulously built. The horrifying idea that he could violently lose absolutely all of it over a highly manipulative woman who perhaps didn't even truly love him was completely, utterly unbearable. "What exactly do you want me to do?" he finally asked, his voice completely defeated. "Permanently, publicly end it with her. At the massive gala, make it incredibly, publicly clear that there was a massive misunderstanding regarding her official status within the firm. Go directly home to your beautiful wife and desperately try to somehow rebuild whatever microscopic pieces can still be salvaged. And if I absolutely refuse," Julian let out a massive, heavy sigh, "then I will be legally, federally forced to aggressively present this massive evidence directly to the corporate board of directors. Adrian, our entire multi-billion-dollar business reputation is actively on the line. I absolutely cannot permit this highly illegal fraud to continue." That exact night, Adrian arrived home significantly earlier than usual, shockingly finding Eliza sitting peacefully in the living room, quietly reading a book. There was something incredibly, terrifyingly different about her. A massive, untouchable serenity that he hadn't seen in agonizing years, exactly as if she had already made a highly critical, life-altering decision. He tentatively began by sitting heavily next to her on the sofa. "Can we please talk?" She calmly bookmarked her page and looked directly at him. Her piercing green eyes were incredibly calm, but highly, terrifyingly alert. "Of course. About the massive gala," he hesitated, desperately searching for the exact right words. "Perhaps you should accompany me after all, officially as our legal wife." Eliza intensely studied him for a highly uncomfortable, incredibly long moment, and Adrian felt completely, utterly naked under her piercing, analytical gaze. "Adrian, is there something massive you would desperately like to confess to me?" "What exactly are you talking about?" "About Michaela, about exactly what is truly, actually happening between you two." Adrian physically felt his heart violently accelerate. How the hell did she know? Exactly how much did she know? "Adrian, you absolutely do not need to explain anything right now," she stated, gracefully standing up. "As you arrogantly said before, some massive revelations are infinitely better made at the absolute perfect moment. I will confidently see you at the massive gala, Adrian. It is going to be an incredibly, highly fascinating night." And for the absolute second time that week, she confidently walked away, leaving him completely alone with his highly toxic lies and a rapidly growing, terrifying sensation that he had completely, permanently lost absolute control of the entire situation. Interactive question. Adrian's mistress was stealing from his company. What would you do if you found out your partner's lover was a scam artist? Drop a comment. The entrance and the ultimate humiliation, the exact day of the massive event. Eliza woke up with an absolutely supernatural, terrifyingly calm focus. She had slept incredibly deeply for the absolute first time in agonizing months, and she physically felt exactly like an untouchable, fierce warrior, meticulously preparing for the absolute most important, brutal battle of her entire life. Sophia happily spent the entire day safely at her maternal grandmother's estate, completely shielded from the highly explosive drama that was about to unfold. Eliza had sweetly, lovingly explained to the little girl that Mommy had an incredibly important, fancy party to attend, and that they would have a massive, special girls' day together over the weekend to completely make up for it. At exactly 3 p.m., Isabella's elite glam squad aggressively arrived to begin the massive, final transformation. For the next 4 agonizingly meticulous hours, Eliza was flawlessly molded, highly polished, and completely, violently transformed. not just into a significantly more glamorous version of herself, but physically into the terrifyingly powerful, fierce woman who had been aggressively sleeping deep inside her for agonizing years. Her beautiful hair was styled into flawless, classic 1940s Hollywood waves, incredibly sophisticated, utterly timeless. Her highly strategic makeup aggressively highlighted her piercing green eyes in a deeply dramatic yet incredibly elegant manner, perfectly finished with a sharp, blood-red lipstick that fiercely promised to leave an unforgettable, permanent mark on absolutely everything she touched. The breathtaking emerald gown flawlessly hugged her body, exactly like a second skin, and the towering designer stilettos made her physically feel exactly like an untouchable Amazonian queen, completely, fiercely ready for absolute war. When she finally stared deeply into the full-length mirror one absolute last time before leaving, Eliza absolutely no longer saw the pathetic, neglected, highly submissive wife she had mutated into. She clearly, vividly saw the incredibly strong, fiercely determined woman she had absolutely always been, fully prepared to aggressively reclaim her rightful, massive place in the world. The iconic Plaza Hotel was absolutely resplendent that crisp October night. The massive golden lights illuminating the neoclassical facade beautifully created a majestic, blinding glow perfectly reflected in the endless line of luxury vehicles aggressively pulling up in constant succession. The highly anticipated annual Manhattan Business Association Gala was absolutely always the most incredibly prestigious, elite event of the entire city's social and corporate calendar, actively gathering the absolute highest echelons of the business elite, highly influential politicians, and massive media personalities. Adrian confidently arrived at exactly 8 p.m., impeccably dressed in a bespoke, tailored Armani tuxedo, with Michaela aggressively clutching his arm. She was wearing a highly flashy gold designer gown that sparkled blindingly under the heavy lights, her bright blonde hair perfectly slicked back into an incredibly sophisticated chignon. At 27 years old, Michaela Vance possessed a highly calculated, aggressive beauty. Every single gesture, every fake smile, every highly rehearsed movement seemed meticulously, coldly planned to cause absolute maximum impact. "You are acting incredibly nervous," she observed sharply, as they confidently walked down the massive red carpet, arrogantly waving to the flashing photographers and specialized corporate journalists. "Just highly focused," Adrian replied, but his hand violently tightening its grip on her arm completely betrayed his massive internal tension. "Remember, you are exclusively my brand new strategic partner, solely responsible for aggressive international expansion. Absolutely nothing more, nothing less." Michaela smirked, but there was something incredibly sharp and highly lethal in her cold eyes. "Of course, darling. Absolutely whatever you want." The massive grand ballroom of the luxury hotel was flawlessly decorated with highly refined, pure elegance. Massive arrangements of white and gold exotic flowers, towering crystal chandeliers that beautifully created a dazzling, blinding play of light, and incredibly expensive tables highly strategically arranged to actively encourage high-stakes corporate networking and massive business gossip. Adrian and Michaela were instantly, aggressively surrounded by massive groups of wealthy entrepreneurs, aggressive journalists, and highly important VIP personalities. Adrian formally, smoothly introduced Michaela, utilizing his highly rehearsed, fake corporate pitch regarding her unmatched professional competence and massive strategic vision. But he literally could not help but aggressively notice the highly speculative, toxic side glances the elite guests were actively exchanging with one another, New York high society was incredibly small and highly incestuous. Absolutely everyone intimately knew that Adrian Sterling was a legally married man. Edward Pierce, the highly influential, incredibly powerful president of the association, smoothly approached them with a highly polished, fake political smile. "Adrian, what an absolute, massive pleasure to see you here tonight. And this must absolutely be the famous Michaela we have heard so incredibly much about." "Edward, absolutely always a pleasure." Adrian confidently extended his hand. "Yes, this is Michaela Vance, our brand new Director of International Expansion." "Fascinating," Edward stated smoothly. But his highly piercing eyes heavily carried a toxic curiosity that aggressively went far beyond simple professional interest. "And your beautiful wife, Adrian? It has been an incredibly long time since we have had the pleasure of seeing Eliza at any of these public events." Adrian physically felt a massive, heavy knot violently form in his stomach. "Eliza actively prefers to completely focus on highly private, personal family matters. You know exactly how she is." "Of course." Edward nodded slowly, but there was a highly distinct, awkward strangeness in his tone that made Adrian feel incredibly, physically uncomfortable. On the complete other side of the massive ballroom, directly near the grand entrance, Julian Hayes aggressively checked his expensive watch for the exact 10th time in 5 short minutes. It was exactly 8:40 p.m., and Eliza absolutely had not arrived yet. He was genuinely beginning to desperately wonder if she had completely changed her mind. If the massive, terrifying courage she had fiercely displayed all week had finally, completely abandoned her. And that was exactly when the loud, chaotic conversations in the massive room began to gradually, noticeably die down. Exactly like massive ripples aggressively spreading across a quiet lake. Heads violently snapped toward the grand entrance. Highly toxic whispers began to aggressively circulate. Even the massive live orchestra seemingly, inexplicably began to play significantly softer, exactly as if they instinctively, profoundly recognized that something utterly extraordinary was about to violently happen. Eliza Sterling had officially arrived. She confidently appeared at the absolute top of the massive, sweeping marble staircase that elegantly descended directly into the main ballroom. And for one massive, explosive moment that felt like an absolute eternity, time simply, completely stopped. The breathtaking emerald gown flawlessly flowed around her body exactly like liquid water, aggressively catching and perfectly reflecting the blinding lights of the massive chandeliers in an almost magical, terrifying way. Her fierce posture was exactly that of an untouchable warrior queen. Shoulders perfectly straight, chin held incredibly high, and those piercing green eyes, which had absolutely always been her signature trademark, now violently burned with an aggressive intensity that seemed to physically illuminate the entire massive room. She slowly, gracefully descended the marble steps. Every single, flawless movement was highly calculated for absolute, maximum, devastating impact. There was absolutely no rushing, zero pathetic anxiety, only an absolute, terrifying confidence that aggressively radiated from her exactly like a massive, highly palpable aura of pure power. The absolute silence in the massive room was almost completely deafening. Over 200 highly influential people, billionaire CEOs, powerful politicians, elite socialites, aggressive journalists, absolutely dropped whatever they were doing to intensely stare at this blindingly dazzling woman who had miraculously appeared exactly like a divine vision. "My God!" someone whispered loudly near the massive entrance. "Who the hell is that?" "That is Adrian Sterling's wife," came the highly shocked, whispered reply. "Eliza Sterling! It has literally been years since we have seen her in public." Adrian, who was standing in the dead center of the massive room, confidently talking to a group of elite London investors, physically felt a massive, freezing shiver violently run down his spine before he even turned around. There was something incredibly terrifying in the specific quality of the silence, in the exact way the loud conversations had completely, violently ceased. It made his primal survival instinct aggressively ring every single alarm bell in his body. When he finally slowly turned around and saw her, his handsome face visibly, completely lost all of its color. This was absolutely not the pathetic, submissive, highly neglected wife he had happily left locked at home for agonizing months. This was a completely, violently transformed woman, an absolute, terrifying force of nature in human form. And she was walking directly, purposely toward him. Michaela aggressively followed Adrian's terrified gaze and physically felt her own stomach violently shrink into a tiny knot. She had obviously seen photos of Eliza, old, boring photos from past social events, a few casual, pathetic images Adrian kept hidden on his phone. But absolutely nothing, literally nothing, had prepared her for the massive, highly magnetic, terrifying presence of the woman who now completely, utterly dominated the absolute attention of every single person in the massive room. "Adrian," Michaela whispered, her voice completely saturated with a massive insecurity she rarely ever showed. Is that her, Adrian?" He literally could not answer. He was completely, utterly hypnotized by the breathtaking vision of his own wife. A wife he had aggressively neglected, massively underestimated, and cruelly betrayed, walking directly toward him with the absolute terrifying confidence of an untouchable warrior goddess. Eliza flawlessly reached the exact spot where they were frozen. The tight circle of elite businessmen aggressively surrounding them automatically, respectfully parted to grant her immediate access, exactly as if they instinctively, profoundly recognized that they were actively in the presence of someone utterly extraordinary. "Adrian," she stated. Her voice was incredibly soft, but heavily loaded with a massive, terrifying authority that instantly forced absolutely everyone nearby to fall completely, utterly silent. "What an absolute massive surprise to miraculously find you here." She slowly, calculatingly turned toward Michaela, intensely studying her with a freezing gaze that was simultaneously highly evaluative and completely, terrifyingly impassive. "And you must absolutely be Michaela Vance. I have heard so incredibly much about you." Michaela desperately tried to force a smile. She frantically tried to aggressively summon that highly calculated, toxic confidence that had absolutely always served her so incredibly well. But something terrifying in Eliza's piercing gaze made her feel exactly like a pathetic, tiny child being harshly evaluated by an imposing adult. Yes, I am Michaela," she miraculously managed to stutter out. "I actively work closely with Adrian in international expansion." "How incredibly fascinating," Eliza replied, her tone remaining completely, perfectly cordial. "International expansion. Adrian has absolutely always possessed such a massive, aggressive passion for exploring brand new territories." The heavy, highly toxic insinuation absolutely did not go unnoticed by a single person in the massive circle actively watching them. Several wealthy businessmen aggressively exchanged highly significant, knowing glances. And significantly more than one aggressive journalist discreetly, rapidly activated the audio recorder on their smartphone. Eliza. Adrian finally, miraculously found his voice, although it came out significantly more hoarse and terrified than he had intended. "What exactly are you doing here?" She smiled then. Absolutely not the highly forced, submissive, conciliatory smile he arrogantly knew, but something completely brand new, something that aggressively carried a massive, highly dangerous, lethal promise. I am officially here as Julian's +1, naturally. You absolutely don't mind, I highly hope. After all, I am technically still a vital part of the Sterling family. That was the exact moment Julian Hayes smoothly appeared right by her side, graciously, chivalrously offering her his arm. He was elegantly, impeccably dressed, but it was the highly protective, aggressive manner in which he firmly positioned himself directly next to Eliza that made Adrian physically feel a massive, sharp stab of something that could have easily been violent jealousy. "Good evening, Adrian," Julian stated. His deep voice flawlessly maintained strict professional cordiality, but his sharp eyes aggressively carried a freezing coldness that Adrian had absolutely never, ever seen before. "Michaela." "Julian," Adrian responded, his brilliant mind aggressively, furiously working to somehow comprehend the massive, shifting dynamics of the terrifying situation. "I had absolutely no idea that you and Eliza were— We are incredibly old, loyal friends," Eliza seamlessly answered before Julian could even speak. "It is incredibly comforting to possess true, genuine friends in this city. Don't you absolutely agree, Adrian? People you can completely, blindly trust." The heavy word trust dropped exactly like a massive nuclear bomb directly into the dead center of the conversation. Adrian physically felt all the blood violently drain entirely from his face. Michaela instinctively, fearfully, took a massive step closer to him, exactly as if she were desperately seeking physical protection. Well, Edward Pierce smoothly reappeared, clearly aggressively sensing the massive, highly toxic tension hanging in the air, but fiercely determined to maintain the absolute cordiality of his massive event. "What an absolutely wonderful delight to have the entire Sterling corporate family here tonight. Eliza, you look absolutely, completely breathtaking. It has been incredibly long." "Thank you so incredibly much, Edward." Eliza smiled at him radiantly. "It is incredibly good to finally be back." "Back," Adrian repeated completely involuntarily. "In the massive elite social scene, darling," Eliza stated, staring directly, piercingly into his terrified eyes. "I recently, profoundly realized that I was aggressively missing out on way too many massive things by pathetically staying locked at home. So incredibly many fascinating conversations. So many massive, explosive revelations." The massive live orchestra beautifully began to play a classic sweeping waltz. The massive room gradually, slowly resumed its noisy activities, although dozens of highly curious eyes remained aggressively, discreetly focused on the explosive drama actively unfolding in the dead center of the dance floor. "Eliza," Julian smoothly extended his hand. "Would you graciously care to dance?" "I would absolutely love to," she replied, confidently accepting his hand, without even bothering to cast a single glance at Adrian. As they gracefully glided toward the massive dance floor, Adrian was left standing completely frozen, intensely watching his own wife. A wife he suddenly, horrifyingly realized he had perhaps never truly, genuinely known. Dancing flawlessly, beautifully in the strong arms of his own senior corporate partner. Every single movement she made was incredibly elegant, highly secure, and magnetically, terrifyingly attractive. It was physically impossible not to actively stare at her, impossible not to feel violently drawn to her massively transformed presence. "Are you okay, darling?" Michaela desperately whispered at his side, her voice completely saturated with pure insecurity. Perhaps we should just quietly leave." But Adrian literally could not move a single muscle. He was completely, utterly fascinated by the powerful woman owning the dance floor, a woman he had aggressively, arrogantly taken for granted for agonizing years. A woman who was now violently, publicly showing him, and absolutely everyone else in the massive room, exactly what he had catastrophically lost. And the explosive night was only just aggressively beginning. The terrace confrontation, the beautiful waltz finally came to a flawless end. But Eliza and Julian intimately remained on the dance floor for a few extra measures, speaking softly in highly intimate, conspiratorial whispers. Adrian intensely observed every single gesture, every radiant smile, every tiny moment of physical closeness between them, with a massive, burning intensity that dangerously bordered on pure obsession. "Are you holding up okay?" Julian asked incredibly quietly, his hand still gently, respectfully positioned on her lower back. "Infinitely better than I have been in agonizing years," Eliza replied. And for the absolute first time in months, she genuinely, truly meant it. "Thank you so incredibly much for giving me the massive courage to actually be here." The massive courage was absolutely always there, Eliza. You simply allowed it to sleep for a little while. When they confidently returned to the main social area, they found Adrian standing completely alone. Michaela had aggressively vanished, highly likely fleeing to the luxury restroom to desperately compose herself and frantically plan her next toxic move. Adrian. Eliza smoothly approached him with that exact same, terrifyingly disconcerting calm. "Can we please speak completely in private?" Adrian nodded slowly, completely incapable of refusing. There was something incredibly massive in her commanding presence that utterly, completely magnetized him. They walked silently out onto one of the hotel's highly exclusive side terraces, a significantly more private, quiet space, boasting a breathtaking, glittering view of the illuminated Manhattan gardens. Once completely alone, the fake, highly polished veneer of elite social cordiality finally, violently began to crack. "What the hell exactly are you doing, Eliza?" Adrian demanded, his voice heavily saturated with pure frustration and massive confusion. "I am simply, finally, being exactly myself," she replied effortlessly. "Something I tragically forgot exactly how to do over the last few agonizing years. You know exactly what I mean. This massive, dramatic transformation. Aggressively showing up here with Julian. Publicly, violently embarrassing me. Embarrassing you?" Eliza violently interrupted him, her piercing green eyes violently flashing incredibly dangerously. "Adrian, you aggressively brought your young, dirty mistress to a massive, highly public event and arrogantly presented her as your official corporate partner, who exactly was violently embarrassing whom?" Adrian turned pure ghost white. "How exactly did you find out?" "Oh, exactly how did I find out?" Eliza took a highly aggressive step closer, and Adrian could instantly, powerfully smell her expensive perfume. Not the soft, familiar, submissive scent she had absolutely always worn, but something completely brand new, something infinitely more intense, massively more confident. "I fully know absolutely everything about Le Bernardin. I know absolutely everything about the 5 agonizing months of highly toxic lies. I know absolutely everything about your massive, cowardly plans to publicly, ruthlessly discard me while simultaneously elevating Michaela to the elite status of your brand new, shiny companion." "Eliza, I can completely explain." "You absolutely do not need to," she stated, her voice shockingly, terrifyingly tranquil. "In fact, I should honestly be deeply thanking you." "Thanking me?" Adrian was completely, utterly lost. "Yes, you aggressively did me a massive, incredible favor by brutally showing me exactly what kind of monster you truly are. Can you even begin to imagine if I had horrifically discovered this 10 agonizing years from now? After having pathetically wasted even more of my precious life, desperately trying to be the absolute perfect wife for a toxic man who absolutely did not deserve a single damn day of my fierce dedication. The heavy words violently slashed Adrian significantly deeper than he ever possibly imagined simple words could cut. Because somewhere, deep down in his dark, arrogant soul, he knew with absolute certainty that she was 100% right. "And Sophia?" he asked desperately, frantically trying to aggressively claw back some tiny semblance of control over the chaotic situation. "Sophia is going to be absolutely perfectly fine," Eliza replied flawlessly. "She possesses a fierce mother who loves her unconditionally and who is going to violently, aggressively fight for her. As for her father," she paused highly significantly, "well, that is going to strictly depend entirely on your massive decisions from this exact moment forward." "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I explicitly mean that you possess exactly two massive options, Adrian. You can confidently do this in a highly civilized manner. We legally, fairly divide our massive assets. We establish a strict custody agreement that heavily prioritizes Sophia's absolute well-being, and you maintain a microscopic shred of basic dignity in the legal process." Or, Eliza smiled, a highly toxic, terrifying smile that contained absolutely zero warmth. Or, Julian might aggressively decide to share some incredibly fascinating, highly illegal information with the massive board of directors regarding certain massive financial irregularities involving the highly lucrative London contracts. Adrian physically felt exactly as if he had just been violently punched in the stomach by a professional heavyweight. "You absolutely wouldn't dare do that!" "I wouldn't?" Eliza's eyes aggressively narrowed into terrifying slits. "Adrian, you literally spent the last 5 agonizing months aggressively lying to me, violently betraying me, publicly humiliating me, and maliciously plotting to aggressively throw me into the garbage exactly like a pathetic piece of old furniture. What on earth makes you arrogantly think that you still deserve my fierce protection?" At that exact critical moment, Michaela suddenly appeared in the grand entrance of the dark terrace, having clearly been frantically searching for Adrian. She had meticulously retouched her expensive makeup and aggressively recomposed her confident posture, but there was still a highly visible, heavy tension radiating from her bare shoulders. "Adrian, darling," she said, desperately trying to sound casually arrogant. "Highly important people are actively looking for you. There are massive elite investors who would love to—" "Michaela!" Eliza violently spun toward her with a highly brilliant smile that was pure unadulterated elegance and pure lethal venom. "How incredibly wonderful that you are finally here. I was just aggressively discussing massive decisions and catastrophic consequences with Adrian." Michaela nervously, frantically looked back and forth between Adrian and Eliza, clearly physically sensing the highly toxic electric tension heavily hanging in the air, but absolutely failing to completely comprehend its massive origin. "You know," Eliza continued smoothly, slowly pacing exactly like a starving, lethal predator heavily studying its trapped prey, "I actually heard that you are incredibly, massively talented at aggressively expanding global corporate territories. Julian actually told me some highly fascinating, incredible things about your massive creativity with the complex and international contracts." Michaela's beautiful face violently lost absolutely all of its color instantly. "I literally have absolutely no idea what you are talking about." "I am absolutely certain you do not," Eliza stated incredibly softly. "But I am also absolutely certain that the Federal Department of Financial Audits would be incredibly, highly interested in legally knowing significantly more about those highly creative, massive illegal commissions that mysteriously appeared in your private, secure offshore accounts. "Adrian!" Michaela violently spun toward him, sheer, unadulterated panic aggressively bleeding into her high-pitched voice. "What the hell is she talking about?" Adrian looked frantically between the two women. His beautiful wife, miraculously transformed into a massive, unstoppable, terrifying force of nature. And his young mistress, suddenly looking incredibly pathetic, incredibly young, and highly, terrifyingly vulnerable. For the absolute first time in agonizing months, he began to clearly, vividly see the horrific situation with absolute clarity. Michaela absolutely was not the highly sophisticated, fiercely independent corporate woman he had arrogantly thought she was. She was a massive, pathetic opportunist who had simply seen him as a highly lucrative, easy ladder for massive social and financial ascension. And Eliza was absolutely, undeniably, everything he had completely forgotten she could fiercely be. Brilliant, strong, terrifyingly magnificent. "Michaela," he finally stated, his voice completely exhausted and broken, "I highly think you should leave immediately." "What?" She glared at him exactly as if he had completely lost his damn mind. "Adrian, you absolutely cannot be serious. After absolutely everything that we—" "After exactly what?" Eliza smoothly, violently interrupted. "After you aggressively used my family to illegally advance your pathetic career, after you illegally, federally, stole from the massive company my husband painstakingly built, after you maliciously attempted to completely destroy a sacred marriage entirely for your own greedy, financial benefit. I fiercely love Adrian." Michaela violently exploded, finally showing genuine, pathetic emotion. "No," Eliza stated with absolute, unshakable, terrifying certainty. "You fiercely love exactly what Adrian represents. The massive power, the endless money, the elite status. But as for Adrian, the actual man, I highly doubt you even possess the capacity to truly know him." Michaela glared desperately at Adrian, frantically hoping he would aggressively defend her, that he would violently deny the horrific accusations. But he remained completely, utterly silent. And in that deafening silence, she vividly saw the absolute brutal truth. "You are both going to violently regret this," she finally hissed, her highly expensive, fake mask of sophisticated emo elegance completely, permanently siling away. "Both of you. Perhaps," Eliza stated incredibly calmly, "but at least I will proudly regret it, with my absolute dignity intact." Michaela violently stormed off the dark terrace with incredibly fast, furious steps, her heels clicking aggressively, leaving Adrian and Eliza completely alone once again. A massive, heavy silence violently expanded between them, completely loaded with 7 long years of marriage, agonizing months of brutal betrayal, and the terrifying, inevitable reality of exactly what was rapidly coming next, the final mic drop. "So, exactly what happens now?" Adrian finally asked, his voice pathetic and hollow. "Now, you aggressively choose," Eliza flawlessly replied. "Absolute dignity or complete destruction. Peaceful cooperation or massive nuclear war. Pure respect or catastrophic, highly public humiliation." Adrian stared deeply at the incredible woman standing directly in front of him. His beautiful wife. The fierce mother of his daughter. The exact woman he had formerly sworn to fiercely love and violently protect. And he vividly, horrifyingly, saw not only the massive empire he had permanently lost, but the absolute priceless treasure he had absolutely never, ever truly appreciated. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice violently breaking. "I didn't—" She smoothly, firmly raised her hand, interrupting him instantly. "Not now, Adrian. Some words completely, permanently lose their massive power when they are spoken way too incredibly late. You aggressively made your massive decision exactly 5 months ago." She took a massive, empowering breath. "Now, I am finally making mine." She gracefully turned to confidently walk away, but she completely stopped in the heavy doorway of the dark terrace. She slowly looked back over her shoulder, one absolute last time. "Oh, and Adrian? The absolute next time you aggressively choose a woman, make absolutely 100% sure that she fiercely loves you for the exact man you truly are. Absolutely not for the massive things you possess." She offered a highly sad, incredibly cold smile. "You absolutely deserve that. And honestly, so does she." And with those highly explosive, lethal words, Eliza Sterling flawlessly glided off the dark terrace, proudly walking completely out of Adrian's toxic life forever, leaving him entirely, completely alone with his horrific decisions and the massive, catastrophic consequences that were about to violently destroy his world. What an absolute masterpiece of a mic drop. Do you guys think Eliza made the exact right choice, or would you have ever considered forgiving Adrian? Share your fierce thoughts in the comments below. If you absolutely loved this story of pure karma and powerful revenge, please smash that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. And do absolutely not forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss our next explosive real-life story. Thanks for watching and stay fierce.